Hey you guys, it's Judeana and welcome back to my channel. As you may or may not already know, I've worked at a garden center now for just about 4 years, and so something I thought would be fun to talk about today is the advice I would give to anyone who wants to start gardening. Especially for my area, the Treasure Valley, it seems like there's a lot of people moving in from other climates and a lot of people just don't know where to start, so I'm here to help with that. So the first thing on my list I have for you is hardiness zones. Now, what is a hardiness zone? A hardiness zone is basically the zone in which your plants can live or thrive. It's usually a range of zones. When you go to shop for plants at your garden centers, you'll see on their tags that usually will say like zones 3 to 7 or 6 to 10, things like that. The lower the hardiness zone, the more cold tolerant the plant is. The higher the hardiness zone, the more heat tolerant the plant is. An easy way to find out what your zone is to go ahead and just Google, what is my cold hardiness zone, for enter your zip code. And keep in mind that there are little microclimates here and there, and if you're concerned that you have a microclimate within your zone, you may want to consider asking a garden center staff member about it. Another thing too, when you're looking at plants, is on their tags, it may say annual or perennial, but the only way to truly know for your zone is to take a look at the zones on the plant. Now, what is the difference between an annual and a perennial? Well, a good way to remember it is perennial. You plant it once, it's permanent. It'll come back year after year, and it'll usually grow and fill out a space pretty well over the years. An annual is something you plant once and it dies off in the wintertime and you need to plant it again for the next season. In my area, plants that are annuals usually consist of petunias, calibrachoas, dahlias, gladiolus, even some types of lavender, like your Spanish lavender, I believe, is an annual in our area. So it never hurts to check the tag just to make sure that even though you think it might be perennial, it could be an annual. You just never know. And if there is no tag, Google is your best friend. Look it up. Another thing to keep in mind about your hardiness zone is where you are on the map, climately. And what I mean by that is, do you live in a desert, somewhere that's hot and dry, somewhere that doesn't get a lot of water, but you could still have maybe a wildflower garden? Or do you live in a tropical climate, somewhere that gets a lot of rain, that's a lot more humid for plants? Some plants do better in a humid climate, in a tropical climate, at a zone 8, rather than a zone 8 in a desert climate. In a desert climate, the dry heat, like we have here in Idaho, really dries out the plants, it burns the plants, they really need shade in the wintertime. And those kind of plants are your azaleas, your rhododendrons, yews, and that's Y-E-W, pieris, camellias, different types of nandina, and those are just a few. A great way to observe is by going to your local garden center and seeing what they have in their shade plant section versus their full sun plant section. At our garden center, even though some of the tags say that they're full sun to part sun, really some of those plants are part sun to full shade. And the way we distinguish that is we have a designated shade section. The reason why the tags could vary for the different climates is because of where the plants are sourced. At our garden center, we source a lot of our plants from Oregon, Washington, California, a bit more of a tropical, more humid climate where they can take more sun in that area. However, with our climate being so dry and a very hot, dry desert in the summertime, they do need shade from probably about 12 or 1 o'clock on through the afternoon to prevent burning of the leaves and any other issues that could cause the plant harm. Now, my preference, and this is what I tell all of my customers, is shop below your zone. And the reason being is if you take home a zone 7 plant and you're a zone 7, the next winter may be colder than a zone 7, and you may end up losing your plant. Unfortunately, it happens. Plants, they die. Who would have thunk it? So a good way to prevent something you want to try and keep alive is to shop below your zone. If you're zone 7, shop zone 6 and below. If you're zone 5, Shop zone 4 and below. Now these things will also vary if you're wanting to plant in pots outdoors versus planting in the ground. Obviously, if you're planting in an outdoor pot, something that you want to sustain through the winter time, it is going to be more subject to the cold being in a pot as opposed to being in the ground. So make sure you ask your local garden center professionals about what plants you can keep in pots year-round. Number 2 is get to know your space. How big is your yard? How big do you want to plant your garden? How many feet, meters, yards are you working with? These are good things to know when you're looking at plants and you're trying to compare sizes. If you're looking at a Colorado blue spruce that you love, but it gets 40 feet tall and wide, you're probably not going to want to plant it in a yard that's smaller than 20 or 30 feet. Otherwise, the whole tree is your whole yard. So really take into consideration when you are looking at plants how big they are to see how they will fill in your space. Another thing to observe about your yard is where the sun's location is in your yard at different times of the day. Are you getting morning shade over by your fence or on one side of your house and then afternoon sun? These are things to consider, as full sun plants, at least in our area, need at least 6 or more hours of light a day. And shade plants, they can do with maybe 3 or 4 hours of sun and shade the rest of the day. Where you're located on the planet and what direction your house is facing can also make an impact on where and what you want to plant in your yard. Say if you have a north-facing house, well, north-facing, where I'm at in Idaho, is pretty shaded all day. And then south-facing gets sun from morning to night. East-facing, you get the morning sun and afternoon shade. West-facing, you get all of the evening sun and morning shade. So plants that can tolerate the heat a little bit better, plants that can tolerate the sun, maybe some of your more drought-tolerant plants in my area are going to do better on a west-facing side or a south-facing side. Plants that like the shade, they're going to do better in the north and east-facing sides. Another thing to consider about your yard is, are there any natural mounds or berms, or are you planning on adding those in? That is also going to affect how your plant does with not only the size, but the water that it needs, as it is a bit more elevated and maybe not as insulated as it would be on level ground. Number 3 is native plants. Now, I cannot stress enough how important it is to know your native plants, and it's for a few good reasons. Not only do native plants help keep your local pollinators just thriving and living year after year, but because native plants are native to your area, they're likely to do better for you and maybe even be easier care for you. If you have yarrow that pops up in your yard and you really like how it looks, well, it might be a native plant. And as you explore your local garden centers, you may be able to ask them for information about native plants in the area. Some, like where we are, we like to teach classes and have workshops on different plants, not just house plants, but garden plants. And we also carry in free information, handouts. So make sure to check your local garden center for free information. And of course, Google's your best friend. You can find out a lot of different things on Google. Number 4 is garden styles. Now this is starting to get to something that I tend to enjoy researching, knowing different garden styles in your area. Just to name a few examples, you have your pollinator gardens, which have lots of flowers and maybe even a few fruiting things to support the local pollinators, like your bees, butterflies, wasps, hummingbirds. And yes, wasps, they're pollinators. As much as we don't like them because of, what they are, they're still important to the environment. Even flies are considered pollinators. So keep that in mind when you are planting any sort of garden. You're gonna have to deal with bugs. It's just how it is. You won't be able to escape it. And when you learn to garden, you may even learn to like some of those bugs, because the spiders eat the mosquitoes. And the worms not only fertilize the soil, but aerate the soil as they move through it. And then there are the ones that we just know and love, like your butterflies, maybe your bumblebee, or your hummingbirds that are a lot of fun to watch. So expect all sorts of pollinators, all sorts of critters and creatures coming to your garden. I kind of got off topic there for a minute. Another garden style that you may or may not know of is xeriscaping or minimal scaping. I don't know what the other term is called, but what xeriscaping is basically not having many plants at all, but the plants that you do have can thrive on little to no water, which is like your yuccas, succulents, cacti, things like that. Maybe even some varieties of creeping thyme, just more lavenders, just more drought tolerant plants. Of course, then you have like your Japanese gardens, your English gardens, and then your good old-fashioned veggie gardens and fruit gardens. Basically, it's good to know different garden styles so that way you know what you want to get out of your garden. Some other things to keep in mind when you are looking at gardening styles is taking note of what plants in those styles do better for sun and what does better for shade. Number 5 is water. The main thing to look at is how will your garden get watered? If you have veggie boxes, are you going to hook a drip line up to them? And especially if you have trees and shrubs, they're going to need a drip line as well, at least for our area. Or are you going to hand water? Are you at a place where maybe you only need sprinkler water? Otherwise, too much water can make the soil soggy and kill your plants that way. These are all great things to research, and it all kind of ties back into observing your yard as well and getting to know your yard. Number 7 is exploring your local garden centers. This is a lot of fun. Did you know your brain actually releases dopamine when you are around plants and when you stick your fingers in soil? I mean, come on. It is a scientific fact that you become happier at a garden center. So go to your local garden centers, check them out, see what they have available, see how they have things sectioned out. Their shade section, their sun, their perennials, their annuals, their fruiting plants. Get to know what plants have a scent or what their flower looks like. A plant looks a lot different in a photo than it does in person. So please, please, please go check out these plants in person. It will give you an idea of what it could look like when it's mature in its habitat. Another thing to be clear of too is that one alocasia or that one hosta you saw on Google that's pink and black or whatever colors. Now people are just getting really mean with AI and they're creating fake plants to scam people. So that is another thing to keep in mind. If you go to a garden center looking for a specific plant, maybe call them ahead of time and see if they have it in stock, or show them a photo of the plant and see if they have it then, because you never know, it could be AI generated and then, well, sorry to break your heart. If you find a garden center employee who can take you on a mini tour of the different plants and what all they're good for, great, they are a wealth of knowledge and it's someone you can easily get answers from. However, if no one's available or if you're just a little bit more shy, Google is your best friend. You can find out a lot about different plants just by Googling them. You can even make a list of plants and then do more research when you get home about them. When you go shopping for plants and you're looking at them, usually on the tags it'll say not only what hardiness zone it is, if it's good for shade or sun, it'll also tell you what pollinators they attract. Some of them might even say that they have medicinal purposes. Hi, Sam. He's so cute. And other benefits listed on the tag. However, some plants may not say how much fertilizer that the plants need. That is something you would need to research on your own. If you have naturally acidic soil, you may not need to fertilize things like hydrangeas or roses as often as they would need fertilized where I am. You just never know. It's another good thing to ask your garden center professionals. If you have the time and if you have it in your budget, check out the classes and workshops they may be hosting at different times of the year. It's always great to go in person and see the process, how to prune roses, how to set up an annual planter for blooms that last all summer long. At Franz Woody, where I worked, all the classes and events were listed on the website first, so make sure to check the websites of the garden centers you want to visit near you. Another good thing to know about when you're shopping for plants is knowing the kind of soil that you have in your area. The different soil types will affect how your plants grow. If you have sandy, loose soil, well then you may need to water a little bit more often because it's likely to dry out a little bit more often. If you have hard clay soil like we do in our area, then you may have to apply water a little bit more slowly so as it seeps into the soil instead of just pooling on top of the soil. That's why I highly recommend, if you live in the Treasure Valley area, get yourself a drip system for your trees and your shrubs at least, because those roots need to go deep. And drip systems will seep into the soil and go deep into the soil, allowing those roots to go deep. Otherwise, you may end up with issues like your roots searching for water and coming up if you only have sprinkler water. In the process of getting to know your soil, you'll get to know if you have acidic soil or maybe soil that needs a bit more nutrients. You may have to amend the soil. In the case of where we live here in the Treasure Valley, we do have very high alkaline soil. So if you go to plant a blue hydrangea, over the course of a year or two, it may turn pink just because of the alkaline in the soil. So you may need to get an extra nutrient to add to your hydrangea to keep the blooms blue if you want them blue. Hydrangeas are one of those plants anyway that needs more nutrients naturally, more fertilizer more often, just like roses. So make sure to ask your garden center professionals about the plants for your area. Number 8 on my list is having a plan or drawing a plan. Now you could have somebody else draw up a plan for you, especially if you're doing a larger area, a larger landscape. It's nice to have someone come into your yard, take a look at the area, see what will do good in what places, and just pick their brain for knowledge. However, if you're wanting to plan your yard out yourself, I think that is a really fun and creative way to get to know gardening really, really well. I will say it is important to have a plan, especially if you're doing a larger landscape, so that way you can have a vision of how the plants will grow together. It's also good to plan things out because different things bloom at different times of the year. If you plant lavender, you'll get blooms from July to September. However, if you plant phlox, you'll only get blooms in the spring and then it'll just be foliage for the rest of the year. So by doing your plant research while you plan, you can put things in different areas of your yard for things that bloom throughout different seasons of the year. Another thing to keep in mind is if you live in a subdivision, do you have an HOA? Are they a stricter HOA? Now, before you can plant, you may need to get your plan approved by your HOA. Otherwise, you may get something in the mail that says, sorry, you have to rip your tree out, we don't approve it. I have gotten that story several times being at the garden center, and I can tell you it doesn't get any easier the more that I hear it. Save yourself some heartache. If you live in an HOA, they may already have a list of plants and trees, shrubs, at least trees and shrubs, the bigger things, that they would be more partial to when planting. The next piece of advice I would give to you about when you're planning and planting is to start with your anchor plants. Start with your trees, start with your shrubs. Start with the things that are gonna take the longest to grow and that are the most expensive. Once you have your anchor plants in place, then you can plant littler things around them. For number 9, I have budgeting. Please, 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 and I will say this to everyone, don't go into debt for plants. It's not worth it. The heartache of being in debt over the beauty of your yard, it just doesn't balance. Save yourself some sleep at night and budget your plan. Gardening is an investment, especially if you found your forever home. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be always changing, because it absolutely will be always changing. And plants, they're expensive. Think about all the money you'll save planning it out, making a budget, as opposed to just finding things when you see them and kind of planting willy-nilly in your yard. Things that may or may not do well. You just never know. If you have it in the budget to buy bigger plants, more mature plants, and if that's what you want, then by all means, have at it. However, if you are working on a bit of a tighter budget, be willing to shop some smaller, younger plants and watch them grow. Training plants to grow up trellises, arbors, gazebos, and other structures is going to be a lot easier planting them smaller than it will be planting a huge plant up against something where it's not really gotten its time to attach to what you're hoping it will attach itself to. When you're creating your budget, maybe create a seasonal budget. What's your spring budget gonna look like? How is it gonna differ from the fall? Usually planting larger items like trees and shrubs is better in the fall because they go through winter a little easier. Their roots and their root growth is all they're really focused on when planting in the fall, as opposed to their budding flowers in the spring and putting out fruit and the other things that the plants have to worry about in the springtime. Whereas your spring budget may be looking like buying some annuals for your pots for the summertime, or getting those pepper plants you want to plant and those tomato plants, so that way you can have a full and lush garden to benefit from during the spring and summer months. When you're budgeting seasonally for different times of the year, then you're setting yourself up for success. Now remember, if you did draw out a plan and you did make a budget, it may be years before you see the finished product, and that's okay. Have patience. Growing plants is a labor of love, and it's a labor of patience. A lot of patience. They are going to test your patience. I've had people come to me who planted a hydrangea, and for the first 2 years it didn't do anything, it didn't flower. But then as it matured, it began to flower. Same thing with planting a fruit tree. If you plant an apple tree that's only a couple years old, you may not see fruit on it until it's maybe 5 or 6 years old. Those are other things to keep in mind when you're planning out your garden. I'm going to say this, that I don't know actually how many people are going to talk about this, but it is plant for the future. And oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start in this one because I think it is something that is really important. If you are in your 50s or maybe even a little younger and you have the energy to run around your garden and to continually pull weeds and really maintain all of your flowers and all of your different things in your garden, well, as you get older, you may not have that same mobility to do all of that. Or you may just not want to have that much maintenance to start out with in the first place. So really think about the kind of maintenance you want to keep in your yard. How often are your trees going to need trimmed? How many flowering plants are you going to have to deadhead every day? Really think about how much maintenance you want to put into your yard, and then you can research what kind of plants will fit your maintenance needs for your yard. It is so important to know how big plants get because a lot of people, they can't really vision it, they have to see it. So when you are looking at plants, when you are planning out your yard, really think about what it's going to look like when it's mature and how the other plants are going to look like around them when they're mature. And the last thing I have in this section is be considerate while you plant. Whether you're in your forever home or just starting out, someone else likely is going to inherit or get your house and your yard for the future. So really what you are doing is you are planting for the future, not just your future, but somebody else's future. Try not to create problems for other people. So many times when I get an older couple coming in to work saying, oh, we don't care if this tree gets 50 to 60 feet tall and wide. We like this tree and we'll be dead by the time it goes on to somebody else and becomes somebody else's problem. As this economy gets worse and worse, the last thing you want to do is create problems for other people. At least that's me. That's what I believe. The goal in creating a garden is creating something beautiful that lasts for generations to come. Now, when you have the mindset of, well, I don't really care, I'm going to do what I want, I mean, that's great if you have several acres of land and you can plant anything you want wherever. But if you're in a subdivision with a smaller yard and you have neighbors around you, well, that can be a bit of an issue. For instance, say you want to plant grapevines along your fence, but that fence is shared with your neighbor. You may want to talk to them about it first because what if they have a dog? What if their dog eats the grapes? Another thing too is if you're planting grapes along your fence or any sort of vine, as they mature, vines tend to weave themselves into places and latch. So there's a good chance that your fence may not be very pretty. And what I mean by that is you'll have vines growing in between your boards in your fence that you may have to rip out at some point, and it also just deteriorates the lifespan of your fence. And if you're sharing that with your neighbor, it's not very considerate. The neighbor behind my mom had planted wisteria vines, hoping it would climb up their house. However, the wisteria climbed up the rain gutter and into the siding of the house, which I think did damage their house a little bit. So when you're researching where to plant what, also research how aggressive plants grow, be considerate of your neighbors, leave your yard a little better than you found it, please, for the younger generations, for the people like me who hope to move into a house and not inherit quite as many problems. So that way we can start families. So that way we can start our lives, because it's not getting any easier, folks. It just ain't. Please have the kindness in your heart to do that for us. Please, please, please. Pretty, pretty please, with a cherry on top. We would really appreciate that as we go to inherit it and hope to improve on what you've already done. All right, you guys, number 10 and the last little piece of advice I have for you is everyone kills plants. A friend and coworker of mine once told me that the road to a green thumb is lined with dead plants. And it is absolutely true. So don't let that scare you and stop you from starting. Gardening is a process. There is a lot to learn. And not only are your plants going to grow, but you'll grow and you'll learn from it too. I hope this video helped you and inspired you wherever you're planted. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.